Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Basira and I'll be your chair today. Welcome to the second regional feedback webinar. We are joined by representatives from across the Midlands today. And just a few housekeeping rules before we begin. MCB has actually already issued guidelines for a phased reopening, and these can be found on mcb.org.uk/coronavirus. We will also be, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, any feedback, comments after the webinar is concluded, please email covid@mcb.org.uk. We will also be having a Q&A session in the midway through this webinar and at the end. So please put your questions in the chat box. We will try to get to as many questions as possible, but we do have time restrictions. And I'm now going to hand over to our Deputy Secretary General, Hussein, who will begin with a short recitation of the Quran.
Jazakallah, thank you, Sister Basira, and Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to everybody. Peace be upon you all. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Surah Taha, chapter 20, verses 25 to 28. He said, O my Lord, expand my breast for me and make my affairs easy to me and loosen the knot from my tongue that they may understand my word. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Once again, welcome. A brief introduction to myself. My name is Hussein. I'm part of the leadership team at the Muslim Council of Britain, and in particular part of our COVID community response group that's been the main forefront of our activities for the past 3 months as we've been in this lockdown and trying to help and to derive and to chart a path forward for our communities, inshallah, via consultation and via working together. My day job, I work as an engineer in the energy sector, and like others on the MCB leadership team, we're all volunteers. And like many of yourselves, similarly volunteering for your organizations, your masjids, your madrasas, your institutions, all very passionate about doing the best that we can for our institutions, and of course getting through some of the challenging situations that we have with us at the moment. A bit of context for today. I'll begin with just a few minutes. Then I'll talk briefly about the what our view is in terms of the next couple of days and weeks during June, as we look ahead to places of worship, madrasas and community centres being able to reopen for individual worship, probably at the beginning, followed by smaller and then larger congregations, inshallah. But then what we're really keen, I'm just really wanting to emphasize at the beginning, inshallah, is that this is an interactive session. We'll have Q&A throughout, so please put questions or comments or even just views and opinion, your thoughts in the chat box, and then we'll take breaks at midway and then at the end, inshallah, to address them. And any questions that we can't answer today or any of the panelists can't answer, inshallah, we can get back to you afterwards as well. So since early May, the MCB, along with our members and partners, have been consulting communities on their needs for planning for reopening. And of course, the needs are many. Whilst some of us, we will remember those days in the middle of March, which seemed like ages ago now, but it was only 3 months away when this the lockdown kind of descended upon us. It all happened all of a sudden within a matter of days. We can see and we know that the coming out of it the other way in terms of preparing to reopen safely is a much more challenging and a much more path that requires more patience and more planning and more careful consideration. At the beginning of May, we started this consultation with an online survey which received over 350 responses from across the country, and that helped us and that led us with a variety of views and opinions actually, and that led us to drafting and putting out some discussion guidelines on the 18th of May, which recommended some of the key things that institutions need to be thinking about, and that we recommended also a 6-step process for planning. from the feedback and anecdotally from what we're hearing so far, but I'd be very interested, and others on the panel will, I'm sure as well, be interested in your views on how useful you found that or other things that you've seen about in terms of guidance. And of course, the key thing that we want to be exploring today is what further guidance and support our communities will need through the rest of the month of June, inshallah. So please don't be shy to share your views. As we know, the government's initial indications are for the first week of July for the beginning of some kind of phased reopening of places of worship, and that will include madrasas and community centres. And of course, there's this big debate right now in the news since in England the restrictions were partially relaxed on Monday this week. This debate around whether are we easing the restrictions too soon? You know, is the R number too high, etc.? Is there still too much risk? Kind of that balance between restarting the economy and safety. And there are others, of course, on the other side of the debate who are saying, actually, no, we're not easing the restrictions soon enough. You know, there's shops, etc., and non-essential shops are able to reopen now with physical distancing. What about places of worship and faith buildings as well? So the debate is there to be had. It's a valid debate. It's happening in the press right now. I think one thing just that I want to emphasize is that as Muslims, we must be aware that we all know BAME communities have been hardest hit by the coronavirus, unfortunately, over the past couple of months. And as per the Public Health England report yesterday as well, that highlighted that, and scientists and medical professionals alike have emphasized that the very real risk, not only of a second wave being present, but also a second wave often having the risk of being more deadly and more severe than the first wave. And so I think the importance of exercising caution cannot be emphasized. Active institutions and organizations to bear that in mind, not least for our own responsibilities towards people who use our buildings, but also because a lot of our community members will of course be worried about this risk, and particularly the heightened risk for BAME communities, of course, of which many Muslims are. So this week represents the second part of MCB's consultation via a series of regional webinars. So we had one for the North of England yesterday, and today with yourselves in the Midlands. And I'll be very shortly handing over to some of our panelists from the regional associations across the Midlands, inshallah. But just before that, I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking through the guidelines. I'll just share my screen. So for those of you who haven't seen, the 6 steps that were based on the consultation last month that we've currently been recommending, I'll run through them very briefly. And again, in the chat, if you have any thoughts or questions on them, please do share your thoughts. They are: allocate a COVID safety officer for your institution or building, conduct a risk assessment of your building. Number 3, calculate and estimate your new capacity. Number 4, identify new equipment and measures that you'll need. Number 5, train your volunteers and staff. And number 6, communicate out widely to your wider community. Just 1 second whilst I bring up the PDF itself. So hopefully you can see the screen there. So COVID safety officer. So we've been hearing actually, and certainly from myself, but again, if others on the panel are hearing otherwise as well, please share. Gradually, this idea is taking up, you know, of assigning one person on your team to be specifically responsible for it, and we can't emphasize enough how essential it is. Like a car, you can't have a car without a driver. You need to have someone in your organization who is driving this process and who is the focal point for the activities. Now that may be your chair or your president or whoever the head of your organization is, but it may not be them. It could be another member of your trustee team or a committee member, etc. Whoever it is, they need to be doing some very important things. Of course, the planning from the safety point of view, but also engagement, and who with. We've listed a couple of key stakeholders who we think is of paramount importance for you to focus the engagement on early to get their views as to help to inform how you will reopen. There's community members themselves who are going to be using the building, whether it's your madrasa, of course, then the teachers and the students, of course, scholars and imams at your center, at your masjid. In particular, if there are any fiqh or jurisprudential issues that you need guidance on, then involve them early. Don't involve them as, just right at the end. You remember something and you ask them, get them on board last minute, get them early, have a meeting, seek their views, etc. Your neighbors, of course, we know in Islam the number of hadiths that we have emphasizing the importance of our neighbors. But unfortunately, we know that sometimes our communities are not the best at that as perhaps we could be, maybe because we don't prioritize it, maybe because we don't think it's important. Well, certainly in this case, what we don't want to happen is our centers reopening and our neighbors seeing people walking in and they're like, oh, okay, well, I wasn't aware of that, or they get surprised, and of course they might have concerns. So knock on the doors, leave them a letter, postcard, whatever it may be, to keep them informed. Of course, your volunteers and staff, and particularly if you're going to be asking them to be doing certain roles, to be wearing certain PPE, etc., then it's important to get them on board early. Of course, the regional mosques and councils of mosques, and as we have today, a couple of the panel from the Midlands. Use them, utilize them. If your city or town doesn't have one, that's fine. Now perhaps it's an opportunity for you to talk and to engage with others in your city or town or region. And I'm sure many have already been doing that over the last couple of weeks since the lockdown began. And your local authority and police, of course, as well. And many of them will have resources and guidance available. Certainly in the call yesterday for the North, we had one gentleman from Rotherham, the local authority, who as part of his role as a community engagement officer was helping with mosques and local places of worship with their risk assessments and with their planning. And so there may be help and advice from your local authority that you can get available. And I certainly know some of the panelists here in their respective cities and towns have been doing that actively over the last few weeks as well. Risk assessments. Now, over the last few days, some of you may have started to think about this. There are templates that are now available and circulating around from a variety of organizations. We've put in this guide some of the key questions that you should be asking yourself. There's no one size fits all. And really the value in any risk assessment for those who have done it in a professional capacity, maybe for a school or a workplace. Templates are useful, but it's no excuse for not going through it line by line and doing it yourself. And so we've put in some of these questions here to help you through. Of course, some of the big ticket items are around the wudu space, for example, which are most likely, when the guidelines are clearer, needing to stay shut. People have been talking about things like keeping doors open, for example, so that you're minimizing the risk of infection by people holding the handles. Now, bear in mind, of course, that some doors are fire doors, and so they're not meant to be kept open or propped open. So please do check on that and make sure that if you do that, that doesn't involve any. That's only for non-fire doors. PPE is another interesting one. In other parts of the world, they've been quite strict in saying no mask, no entry. Now, at the moment in the UK, that isn't the official recommendation from government. Now, whether that changes over this month or not, we're not sure. But you may want to consider that for your own centre. That if you wanted to have that additional level of safety, then that's something that it's your right to ask your visitors or people that use your building to consider. And of course, what that means is, if people are coming to your building and they don't have that, then think about, are you able to source some of that yourself and to provide it to them, for a small donation, for example. And when we are aware that there are some organizations at the moment who are planning to provide some kind of a bulk PPE discount service, and we're aware that people are thinking about that, and no doubt things will evolve over the next couple of days, inshallah, as more of that becomes available. At the moment, the government advice is around this 2-meter gap. And based on that, if you were to estimate your capacity, for example, in a mosque, the prayer hall with the daily prayers, then of course that vastly reduces, unfortunately, the capacity. Most people who I've been speaking to have been estimating 15, 20%, even as low as 10 in some places. But that's clearly an important consideration for you, because that will determine what your maximum capacity is. And of course, beyond that, how do you ensure that your building doesn't exceed that capacity? important within that is the in and out flows. So again, some of us may have seen the photos from countries abroad where some mosques have reopened, in the Middle East or Turkey, for example, and people queuing, nicely outside. It's very much a culture, change, whereas before, perhaps, of course, people might just be used to coming into the masjid, but think about how will you get your volunteers and staff to help people through that process and to ensure that there's an orderly queue outside as they come in and also as they go out as well. Again, I won't go through this in full depth, but the link will be shared, and please do have a look in your own time. New equipment to think about as well. Training your staff and volunteers, a few things for there to be considered as well. Of course, it's important to include both male and female, brothers and sisters in that planning, and of course, young and old. Some of your staff might have already been involved, of course, in some of your welfare services and your COVID response projects. Think about how are you going to be pulling them away from that and putting them onto the day-to-day duties. How will that affect your welfare services? And communication, we're certainly planning as MCB to be providing some template posters and guidance for notice boards, etc. But of course, through all the digital means, through your social media and your WhatsApp and your email groups as well. Think about how you'll be getting your communities in advance, thinking about what they need to know and communicating the key, the new normal, the new essential, really. It's not optional, really. Most of these things that we're doing, it's essential that they know this before they come to the masjid, and how we get everyone aware of this and educated in advance. A final thing to mention is about who is responsible. We have to emphasize, and again, this document does contain, aside from the medical side of things, some legal advice, and we can't emphasize enough that it's the trustees, it's the people who are legally responsible for your organization. They are also legally responsible for the safety of the building, of its compliance with regulations, COVID secure regulations, which we'll be getting more clarity about from the government this month, inshallah, and they're ultimately responsible. And I was just speaking to someone a couple of days ago in Wales, actually, who mentioned to me something very nice, which is one of the big risks as we go in the next couple of weeks is, in a particular city or town, some people may feel under pressure to reopen, whether it's from their own community, the building users, maybe because they're seeing other mosques or madrasas in their town opening, so they feel they need to reopen as well. I think there's nothing wrong with telling and advising and guiding our communities to say, look, there's no need to rush. Everyone can reopen when they're ready. If some people who have more volunteers and staff are ready to reopen, bismillah, so be it, as long as they're confident and their trustees are confident in making that decision. But if others aren't, or if you feel you need more time, you need another 2-3 weeks, so be it, take that time. It's not a question of if we will reopen. I think, inshallah, all of our centers and buildings will reopen eventually. It's not if, but when. And so if you need more time, I think it's really important to emphasize to our communities to take that time. What we don't want and what isn't good for the safety and the health of our communities is for places to be reopening when it isn't safe to do so, and when they're not compliant with COVID secure guidelines, because of course that's going to be compromising the legal operation of that center. So a few things there for me to consider before I finish and hand over back to Basira to go through the with the panelists. Just to emphasize, just going back to here, there will be more resources coming out, inshallah, over the next couple of days and weeks, and your ideas are crucially important as well. So through this session, if you have any ideas after today's session, please do share by email. And the final thing to also mention is, I think it's important to recognize that the huge sacrifices that our communities have been through over the last 3 months. Again, if we all sat down and thought about whether we'd be in the situation that we're at the turn of the year on the 1st of January 2020, of course we would have never imagined the situation that we're at. And in particular with Ramadan and Eid, I was speaking to a Christian colleague at an interfaith meeting a couple of days ago, where I told him, Ramadan and Eid is almost the equivalent of Christmas in many ways, trying to just get across to him the importance of these occasions in the Islamic calendar to what they would understand in the Christian calendar. So I think there's been a lot of sacrifices for the community, and we have now this month of June to plan, to prepare, to get all our ducks in a row, so that we're not rushing about and doing things last minute when it comes to reopening. We can ensure that, just as in the last 3 months, we have been able to maximize and keeping our communities safe and secure. And then inshallah in the next, not only in the next couple of weeks, but for the rest of this year in 2020 and beyond, we can keep that going and we can continue to innovate, to adapt, as we have been for the last 3 months in the coming weeks and months, inshallah. So I'll pause there and I'll hand back to Basira to go through the panelists.
Thank you for that, Hassan. And now I will hand over to Yasmin Surti from the Federation of Muslim Organisations in Leicester.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Yasmin Surti and I'm the Secretary of the FMO, the Federation of Muslim Organisations in Leicester. I'm joined by my colleague Riaz Laher, who's the Vice Chair, who will inshallah chip in as well. And really, I just want to start by genuinely thanking the MCB for the leadership that you've shown throughout this this period of COVID, that has really supported us, certainly as the FMO and organisations we work with, to think about and kind of meander our way through these difficult times. As Hassan said as well, you know, really a massive thanks to our community, the resilience they've shown. You know, this really emotional kind of topic, the subject of closing masjids and madrasas was, you know, was really, really difficult for everybody. But they've shown resilience, and despite, you know, lots of thoughts in the media about a spike in Ramadan over Eid, I think we've dispelled that, and that is credited to everybody for managing this so well. I think in terms of ourselves, there's lots of discussions happening. There's been a local group set up to start to think about the opening of the masjid. So this is very timely, the conversation we're having today, inshallah. And some of the main concerns are really about how to manage reopening the masjids in a safe way, you know, taking into account things like PPE, the vulnerability of people, managing social distancing. You know, for some masjids, bigger masjids, in some ways it might be easier, but in some ways more difficult because they have you know, a much bigger congregation. And again, for smaller masjids, you know, different challenges. Issues around things like risk assessments, which have been mentioned, and inshallah Riaz is with me, and he's a head teacher, so he's very, very skilled, inshallah, in that kind of work and thinking through what he's had to do for the school, which is really helpful, and I'm sure would be willing to share that if it's of benefit to anybody. We know that during this period, masjids have been immensely effective financially, you know, in terms of the Friday collections, collections through Ramadan, on Eid. So again, financially, you know, the ability to manage the reopening of the masjids in terms of deep cleaning and putting all the things that we need to put in place to ensure people are safe, and we're doing it in a safe way. Particularly, I think we're all concerned that there might be a second peak, and we certainly don't want to be at the centre of that. So it's something that's in the back of everybody's mind, and particularly with the new track and trace app. You know, it's very easy to track back to where something originated from. So we need to be really mindful, and that's something I think is playing on people's minds. Also very helpful, I think, the fact that MCB have been working with medical professionals, as we have locally, because again, you know, whilst the scholarly advice is absolutely critical, you know, in a case like this, that the medical and professional advice is just as, if not more, critical. So that's been really helpful for us. Riaz, do you want to come in?
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Am I unmuted? Yes, I am. Sorry, I'm just acclimatizing to the room, inshallah. As Sister Yasmin has already mentioned, I think it might be useful, I hope everyone will agree, if we give, in these few minutes that we have, just a quick timeline in terms of what we've done since pre-lockdown, and then throughout Ramadan, and where we are right now and what we're committed to doing in terms of our endeavours with obviously the national body, and learning from everyone else. It's a wonderful privilege and an opportunity to learn from colleagues from the northern regions yesterday across the north. I think one thing that alhamdulillah was fantastic is the clear sense of unity and coherence amongst all of the regional bodies and members that took part. A real initiative to not only benchmark ourselves against you know, looking for low thresholds of compliance and best practice, but really benchmarking ourselves. You know, we come from a thread and a genealogy of the best of mankind, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we really should be the pioneers in terms of how we prepare our masjids, and risk assessment, you know, by definition is supposed to be vigilant, and if vigilance is the price of excellence, and I'm really hoping there's going to be so much for all of our affiliates and affiliates across the country, with the support of the national body, to learn from what we're undertaking in what is a very you know, different world that we are living with. But alhamdulillah, that I hope at the end of this will be a better world, inshallah, from what we learn. So just as a quick recap, we had a meeting pre-lockdown on the 15th of March of nominated management committee representatives, lead imams and madrasa head teachers, and madrasa affiliates, and you know, a panel of healthcare professionals. I believe one of our colleagues from the city has also logged in. That's not just my other alter ego signed in as Riaz Lahir. I offered him my link because I had asked him quite late. We at the time offered two detailed documents, one an abridged version, which was more of a presentation document, and a more detailed summary reflecting the thoughts and the mashwara that we did at that meeting. It went into various areas, and I'm not as high-tech today, unfortunately, as Brother Hussein. It was a very presentable document that most of our masajid were able to use and utilize and disseminate and adapt indeed for their congregations. The following day, because I do wear two hats, I'm a head teacher of two secondary schools, so I'm engrossed in a lot of this work anyway. We were able to share a very detailed COVID-19 policy, very, very detailed into all of the different areas that would be useful for all stakeholders, particularly management groups. Similar to that, we provided a pack that contained progression of restrictions, not necessarily red, amber, green, but more red, amber, yellow, given the urgency of the situation. And then that was broken down into key control measures, a pre-Ramadan, pre-lockdown risk assessment, and correspondences and signage that institutions could use in the areas, and indeed are still appropriate and relevant to adapt even now. So that pretty much has been a starting point for me, both at my institution and my two schools, but also to build on for some of our local work. On the 21st of March, we had to further implore, though we had released something on the 15th of March, to really advise and implore for most of our institutions to sadly close, and hence this brings us to the Ramadan period. The MCB offered some fantastic information, and obviously we summarized that in some of the summary documents that we had, working on some of the fantastic work that MCB had offered nationally. There was a mention yesterday, and I think this is useful, in terms of all schools and all local authorities in liaison with Public Health England, their own local authority, local government associations, and central government in terms of the DFE, are really doing detailed risk assessments that probably go above and beyond in terms of what the expectation would be from madrasas. So we are working with our local authority, so we're hoping to share that with not only with our affiliates, but working with the national body. Just to finish off, there is one or two tiny little items that I'd like to say. What we have learned from our affiliates and what we are committed to do, and I'm certain in my conversation with the MCB that that is something that is going to happen. We would like, we are endeavoring to have a robust risk assessment, that has a satellite approach for broad application, that builds in thresholds for variables for all institutions, that is adaptable and can be adopted for the individual circumstances, that is ready to use and fit for purpose by all affiliates, that incorporates preferences, nuances and intricacies from each region and each masajid, that is provided and agreed with local authorities as is expectation for schools, that undoubtedly MCB will provide to relevant government bodies and any other groups as appropriate, and that allows institutions to remain autonomous and ultimately to serve the Muslim community. So apologies, I believe I have gone over slightly. I hope that summarizes our journey and our commitment to this national endeavor, and Jazakallah again for to the MCB for hosting and giving us this opportunity to present.
Thank you for that, Riaz. Now I'd like to call Najm Hussein from the Nottingham Council of Mosques.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum.
I think the host may have accidentally left the room.
Carry on, Najm. We can hear you loud and clear.
Assalamu alaikum. Right, my name is Najm Hussein. I'm a committee member of the Nottingham Council of Mosques. We are actually doing things slightly different here. We're going to be tackling it in a different manner. I have my brothers Morana Pirbhai and brothers Yusuf and brothers Asif. So we will be tackling these in our questions in a slightly different manner. I do apologize, we've actually lost my connection for a while, so it took me a while to get back in. I assume we're doing our questions, and I will tackle question 3C.
Najm, yeah, you're more than welcome, Najm, to continue. And then if you wanted to, once you finish, hand over to your other colleagues, Brother Yusuf and Brother Ahmed, and they can tackle as well.
Sorry, I do apologize. I'm having a slightly iffy internet connection. I do apologize. Right, sorry. We are proactively bringing together guidelines and documentation that is actually appropriate for all our member mosques. And inshallah, we will be communicating with them through our existing traditional communication channels, as well as our website and social media. As you all have established, we do have an open line for all of our members to communicate their concerns. And we do keep in regular contact with them, and we certainly do follow up on the communications that we send out, so that they can be safely involved in knowing that how to open their mosques. Any contributions by our members is taken seriously in our decision-making process, and I would urge everybody to be doing the same thing. Contact your members, find out what they want, so that we can then help them move in that direction. Jazakallah khair. If we can now take on Brother Ahmed Pirbhai.
But Ahmed, you just need to unmute.
Jazakallah khairan for that reminder. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to all brothers and sisters. My name is Ahmed Pirbhai. I'm an Imam at the Green Academy Trust Mosque and one of the trustees for Nottingham Council of Mosques. Inshallah, in my 2 minutes, I'd like to give some questions which have been posed to us by our members and individuals who we are in contact with, and also some of the concerns which which have been raised to us by other members and from the community. So one of the most important question, and the first most important question is, Muslims are actually impatient now. Everyone's impatient to get out the houses. Muslims are obviously impatient to participate in the activities and the services at the mosque. So one of the main questions is that when are we actually reopening? And this phase opening, in the guidelines, I've read the MCB's guidelines, although I believe that's a caption, that image is a caption from what, the government website on this, in this regard. However, I think there's 1-2 points about this which I wanted to raise. One of this is that in the MCB guidelines, you talk about the phase reopening, and it alludes to children not being allowed, or a timeline for children to attend the mosque and services at a different time. The government guidelines has not been released, so doesn't say that. I believe that actually causes unnecessary complications for management of mosques when they are trying to regulate attendance, and how they're going to plan this out. So I think that's something which should be considered in the guidelines or in the guidance issued by the MCB. The concept or the point of children attending the mosque, that needs to be really clarified. About phase reopening, you know, when we say individuals are going to be attending, how many individuals, who's going to be given priority if there's a number or which is capped, like 30, 40, we are not aware of that. So these are all questions which the mosques and management need to address. Also, as has been mentioned by the chair previously, that the COVID-19 situation has resulted in a serious financial strain on mosques. So reserves are almost depleted for many mosques. Others are in a very precarious situation and in a position. So a question which mosques and members have posed is that, will there be any funding available? Will there be anything coordinated by perhaps the MCB or any other regional body to assist mosques in reopening? So that's another question which has been raised, and we are trying to support our member mosques in this regard. Also, the question about liability, and this is also something in the MCB's guidelines. So it alludes to that, or it insinuates that the trustees are legally responsible, and hence if something goes wrong, perhaps they will be implicated. I think that also is another point which causes unnecessary complications for management of the mosque to reopen. Obviously, we have to be aware that this is a serious situation, and the management does need to be aware. Trustees are fully aware that they are ultimately responsible. But it's very similar to, you know, shopkeepers, and they are responsible for their building and for their site. So a lot of people have asked me this, that, why are mosques still not open when shopping centers are open, when the shops are open? Obviously, we can give them a number of questions, a number of answers, but that still reflects and illustrates the concern out there and the impatience the Muslim community has. That doesn't mean that we should precipitate the opening and expedite it. We need to do it in a timely manner, which reflects the gravity of the situation. Okay, so just moving on very swiftly. Another concern is that if mosques are, with the Nottingham Council of Mosques, if mosques don't coordinate the reopening, or a phased reopening, so you've got some mosques in Nottingham, for example, open and the other mosques don't, what's going to end up happening, and this is a concern which we have, is that the traffic of worshippers which would have gone to their normal local mosque would now end up at a mosque which has open, again creating pressure and an extra strain on that mosque. So this is something which regional mosques and the Council of Mosques in Nottingham, we're looking at carefully, that of a coordinated response. Obviously, we cannot force member mosques to open or to remain closed. That is ultimately within them. That's a decision they got to make. But one thing which we are looking at, and what we are discussing with our members, is that if there's no coordinated opening, then you're going to have some mosques where the traffic is going to be greater, because Muslim worshippers are going to be heading towards that mosque. And one final point, which is that obviously because of the reduced capacity, so you've got, for example, a mosque which has normally 300 people, 400 people attending, for example, for the Jummah prayers, and the Jummah prayer is led by one imam. Now, if due to the reduced capacity, you're only going to have perhaps, let's say, 1/3 of that, so which is 100. Now, the 200 musallis, the 200 congregants, the mosque will need to hire another imam, have another imam, and have another Friday Jummah service, which is going to add on to the already pressured situation where they are where they are limited with funds. So this whole situation of having a phased reopening and having multiple services does create a serious burden on the mosque. That doesn't mean that we just open it without any consideration, but these are some of the concerns which member mosques have raised to us, and I'm just sharing this with you. Jazakallah. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them at any point which the chair decides. Jazakallah.
Thank you for that, Ahmed. I'd like to call on Ismat Ramji from KSMI MC Birmingham to give us the woman's perspective on the reopening of mosques.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you for having me. So I'm Ismat Ramji, KSMC of Birmingham. So we do have sort of seen the updates regularly, and from all the updates that we've been getting, the main aim is that we would like to facilitate for the community to come back together and engage in their spiritual activities, but in a way that protects and minimizes any risks of spreading the virus, particularly to our elderly and vulnerable. Now, we all know, because we as Muslims, for us, the mosque in itself is such an important place whereby, irrespective of your gender, whether you are male, female, or children, the importance of attending the mosque to practice your worship is important. So I think when we are considering the partial opening, we should not be forgetting that element, that irrespective of whichever gender, whether male or female, the element of worship, those factors need to be considered. I mean, we have been getting quite a lot of questions posed to us with regards to reopening our mosque, and some of the questions that we have, I would like to share with you. The first question is, how would the element of social distancing work? Should we be allowed, should we consider reopening the mosque? How many congregants will be allowed at a time? And then we also get asked, will there be a new wave during the opening? Will the other programs, events be considered even at a limited level? And also, sometimes, we do get quite a lot of people asking us that this normality that we will be going into, what will this normality look like? So that's a question, that needs to be considered as well, because according to me, in my personal opinion, I think the normality that we will be going into will definitely be different. We've tried to be tried to keep ourselves as updated as possible. So, for example, here we do have regular meetings facilitated by Kamran Bhaiya from the Muhmu Trust. This meeting is held with Dr. Justin Barney, the Director of Public Health of Birmingham City Council, and regular updates are provided to Masajid, and any queries and concerns raised are addressed to, which has been proven to be extremely helpful. We have also been attending other meetings on other platforms as well, where certain elements are addressed. We're looking at the financial elements. I think what some of my brothers pointed out earlier, that the financial impact on mosques, that is a serious factor that needs to be addressed. So these meetings have been really proven to be very helpful. And then at grassroots level, we have our umbrella organization, which has been constantly reviewing the situation, and meetings are held where strategies and advice is also discussed. At our mosque, we have a dedicated COVID line to address any queries, which has proven to be very successful too in signposting our members as and when required. We also have teams in place to assist with food parcels, medical updates, and so forth, and financial advice, which will come in quite handy when we are also considering the reopening. Also, there are also other factors to consider too, that when we do go back to the partial reopening, what happens to the services that we are already providing, because that will certainly need to be factored in, because just because the mosques are reopening does not mean that these services will not be required either. And I think that despite the gravity of the situation and the risks, it has awakened community spirit. I think it has increased the need to provide services for your community and for humanity, for mankind to come together in such a situation. We have so many professionals providing their services absolutely free of charge. We have volunteers, our lovely volunteers, who are sort of dedicating their time to ensure that their community is well looked after. And I feel at this particular stage, the support of these volunteers, the support of these professionals will be absolutely necessary. And I think here our ladies are also very extremely helpful. And when it comes to fundraising, like for the month of Ramzan, normally we have fundraisers for Ramadan relief, whereby the money is then given to places where it is most needed. Now, for this particular Ramzan, because of the situation, obviously we were not meeting at the mosques, but that did not stop our ladies to fundraise. I mean, we raised a substantial amount of money. We had our COVID fund as well, in addition to Ramzan relief. And our ladies were absolutely brilliant in raising as much money as possible. So we will be needing resources, including manpower, to manage the next phase. And our colleagues mentioned the need for PPE, hygiene, sanitization to be kept in place. Those are the factors that we as executive committees need to consider before we actually, reopen. And that is under constant discussion. And when it comes to the equipment that is required, whether the finances are there to purchase these items, whether the items are readily available, I think we will need to consider the training also, which was mentioned earlier. I think that's an important factor as well. The training, should it be there, and if it is accessible to everybody, I think that is also important. And I think the most important factor here is that the law of the land should be respected. And we as mosques should be working hand in hand with the government. So we are feeding back to them through these organizations. We have our organization such as Muslim Council of Britain and other platforms as well. Those are proving to be so very helpful in order to feed back to the government as to what the next phase would look like. And I think we should respect the law of the land and then, work together to make the the reopening as easy as possible. So thank you. I hope I've not exceeded my time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Ismat. I'm going to call upon Asif Mohammed from the Nottingham Council of Mosques.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. My question that I was asked to respond to was actually to do with how we're communicating the opening of the masjids with our members and making sure that we're actually working with local authorities and with other public sector bodies to ensure that everything actually takes place properly. One of the issues that we had right at the start was ensuring that we fed to our mosques the importance of making a decision on closing at a very early stage. And what we realized is that that helped us very much in developing our relationship with the local authority and the messages that were going out from government, but also from the City Council here in Nottingham. And as a consequence, we've developed a very close relationship with them, which has now enabled us to work with them as far as the opening of the mosque is concerned. So I think once the decision's been made that's going to happen, we will ensure that we work very closely with our colleagues in the City Council and the police and ensure that any of the decisions that are made are shared with our members, mosque members. But one of the things that I would say is it's really essential that we try and produce documents and guides through the Muslim Council of Britain with that strategic, sort of corporate approach, so that we can use the same information and perhaps just add our own logos locally. So there is a consistent message that goes to every mosque across the country. And it's not something that we are producing individually, because we realized that a lot of the material that we use was actually information that was already being provided by government, and also by the local authority, as well as our colleagues in other cities and more importantly, the Muslim Council of Britain. Thank you for that. I hope I've kept it within my 2 minutes.
Thank you for that, Asif. We're going to have a Q&A session now. So the first question is for Hassan. The question is, when will statutory guidelines be given from the government?
The short answer is it hasn't been announced yet. And we're not the only forum I've spoken to. I know there's also a question on the chat about churches, temples, gurdwaras, synagogues. All the faith communities have been asking massively the questions of the various task forces that are there. No date has been yet put by that task force about when they're going to be giving more guidance. At some point this month in June it's expected, and of course we all eagerly await it.
Thank you for that, Hassan. Now I'd like to ask Yasmin Surti if she could comment on one of the questions was, there has been mention of opening the mosques for solitary worship, but we know that one of the primary purposes of the mosques is for congregational worship. So how do we navigate this particular issue?
So I think the point you made about the purpose of the mosque is around congregational worship is an important point. Clearly, while the mosques remain closed, I think there's a sense that we need to keep them going in some sense, and the government's guidelines around one person being able to, so the imam, for example, being able to be there and offer prayers and guidance through the internet, through different mediums, is something that I think a lot of mosques have taken up, again, just to ensure that the mosque is going. I think it's an interesting one. I think, in these times, many homes have become masjids, and that's a wonderful thing, because that enables whole families to come together and experience that sense of collectiveness around prayer. I think I couldn't really advise on that, but I think it's something we just need to keep the fact that the mosque is about congregational prayer. I noticed, and I don't know if Hassan can comment as well. I noticed that there was in some recent guidance I've seen something about parks potentially being used for prayers, but not actual places of worship, given that they're open spaces, and I think that's something people will be considering as well.
Thank you, Yasmin. And I'd like to ask Hassan another question. If you could comment on a question that was asked about working with other faith communities and perhaps coordinating a, interfaith community kind of joint reopening of places of worship, and what his thoughts are on that.
Of course, there are many similarities between mosques and churches or gurdwaras and others, but there are many differences. I know it's been talked about in different interfaith forums about joint training programs or opportunities or resources. I think it's probably quite challenging to see that being pulled off in the next month to 6 weeks of this. But certainly we will be asking those questions, and if there are opportunities nationally that are coming through, then we'll definitely try our best to feed it through to the Muslim communities. Of course, regionally as well, if there are people who are working together with other faith communities regionally and they're seeing opportunities to share resources there, then by all means, I think there's an important best practice to share, and where we can all support each other across the different faith communities, then even better.
I'd like to ask Najm Hussein if you could I'd like to ask Hassan if there is safety training for COVID officers. Is that being made available by the MCB?
Yes, that was the question I was asked. I think that's definitely planned as part of either resources that we're putting in place for this month, inshallah. So it will most likely be similar sessions like this on Zoom. Of course, written guidance is useful, but Zoom sessions like this, for some people, they prefer that. And where possible, we try to record these Zoom sessions as well for people to watch online. So inshallah, as more clarity and as people are feeding into government, and government will at some point this month share their resources, then the appropriate and more specific COVID safety guidance will come out. I appreciate there's lots of unknowns. I know there was some discussion about children. So yeah, that's an open question. Will the government say something specifically about that? If they're silent on it, then that's down to each of us to, for our own communities, whether we feel it's appropriate to allow children in to masjids maybe of a certain age. If it can be managed, perhaps it's possible. If not, then maybe it's better that we do educate our communities to tell them for the time being it's better for children to stay and pray at home. So again, these are all open questions that we're not sure about, but it will need to be worked in to any training and any support for COVID safety officers as more details become available, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum again. Just to say, you know, one of the things that you mentioned, Brother Hussein, it's really important that we do work with our colleagues in other religions and we get involved as much as possible at a local level in interfaith groups. And the reason why I say that, from our experiences, you know, the Muslim community were very good right at the onset in ensuring that we had everything in place. Sorry about that. Can everyone see me now? Yeah, apologies for that. Well, basically, what I was saying is that one of the things that we did is right at the earliest stages of COVID, we ensured that we had that regular communication with our colleagues in the City Council regarding deaths and how we'd actually deal with that if the increased demand would arise as was expected. And what we found is that many of the other religions didn't actually do that. And then when they got to a point, particularly within the African Christian community, who prefer burials rather than cremations, they started contacting the City Council and asking for exactly the same arrangements at what we had already negotiated with them. And it was very helpful for us to share that information with our Christian friends during that period. And I think it's really essential that we do have that regular contact, you know, through with other faiths, because there are lots of things that we have similar concerns about. And, you know, our voice is a lot stronger if we raise those concerns as an interfaith group. Obviously, there are specific things we as Muslims need to do, but more importantly, there are many things that people of faith will probably need to look at and address with local authorities. And it's important that we try and get more involved in that in the future, inshallah.
Thank you for that, Asif. And now I'd like to call upon Raza Hussein from the Joint Mosques Council of Peterborough.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm Raza Hussein Rahim. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Joint Mosque Council of Peterborough, member of the executive of MCB, Muslim Council of Peterborough, and in a number of other capacities, including non-executive director of the local hospital in the past. First of all, I must echo, very commendable, the work that MCB have done and the guidance that has been set up. There is so much clarity in that guidance, and there is so much professionalism. It reminds me of the days when I was a chairman of the governors, that how such documentation were produced professionally, and we can see this coming out from MCB. To share our workings from the region as far as COVID-19 is concerned, I need to take a step back and explain how the Joint Mosque Council has been in the forefront of the pre-lockdown and era, and currently in coordinating the actions of the 5 principal mosques in Peterborough, representing 20,000 plus Muslims. Joint Mosque Council, formed many years ago, represents all the Muslim mosques in Peterborough and was formalized more recently in 3 years back, and is a prime voice for Muslims of Peterborough and has regular meetings. Now, this is what I want to emphasize. With local authorities, all regulatory bodies, including 3 monthly meetings with chief executive of the local authorities, some cabinet members, and all the heads of the services, police, etc. And these proactive meetings have been a great benefit. And as far as issues like RSC, when it came up, it was brilliant to be able to do that. The pre-COVID meetings to discuss these issues identified many proactive issues like the burial space issues in Peterborough locally for the Muslims, funeral processes in the cemetery. And on our JMC regular meeting radar, we picked up the lockdown imposition coming up and voluntarily started a gradual part and subsequent full closure of the mosque, taking all the precautions as recommended by MCB and other organizations. We were mentioned in the parliament by Paul Bristow, the MP, for the cooperation and the work that we do with the local authority and through organizations in the parliament. We here in Peterborough, like all other cities and regions, want a safe and considered opening as soon as possible. And so that our mosque, which is the focal point of the Ummah, the Muslim Ummah, is functional and vibrant in the best way possible. We see many issues, and these are the issues that we are working on journey, like rest of the other organizations and regions, to try and find solution. I think one of the issue, and the biggest issue, is how to manage madrasa with so many students, while it is not advised by the government to open. We have started online teaching via Zoom and WebEx, and we have done teacher training in the process, and we are working in various ways with the local authority in coordination to see how this opening can be effective within the guidance as it emerges. During the Ramadan, limited number of persons did gather into the mosques for Taraweeh, but it was absolutely limited, making sure the social distance was maintained. Jummah Khutbah and Eid Salahs were delivered online. Regular lectures, dars and tafsir were delivered using YouTube and other vehicles. The prayer of Jummah, a big challenge for all our mosques. Now, this is my second question that we are grappling with. The capacity that we have in each of those mosques are virtually full when there's a normal Jummah. How are we going to combat the issues of maximum numbers, allocation of who attends, marking of social distances on prayer carpets, bringing in prayer mosques as suggested by MCB, wudu from home, regular. Now, one innovative thing that we thought was that obviously the cleaning process is very important, and we definitely implemented that in our partial closure time, where we made sure the cleaning of the carpets was absolutely regular after each prayers, so that we were ensuring the safety of our congregation. We have considered various options as regards to Jamaat, and one of them was staggered opening, which we talked about age, and there are implications, and there are no doubt challenges. How are we going to allow which age and what numbers? It's a big issue, and how we handle it. It's interesting, I saw that in Philippines, in one of the news clips, churches opened up. And when they opened up, they started registering people who could attend to make sure that people were pre-booked to come in this initial era. We may have to think of something innovative like that. And also make a list for communication who attended that particular congregation. We looked at different areas of the mosque. Now, this is something interesting. When you've got Jamaat for different timings, there are not that many people as Jummah. And you could look at different areas of the mosque, different halls, and rotate the more prayers of Fajr, Zohar, Asr, Maghrib, and Isha into different areas so that it is more safe as such. We also have a major challenge at present, which we are trying to combat, which is the issue about funeral, which is a very sensitive time for the families of the bereaved. how many to attend, what to attend. We have obviously worked with the City Council and the Cemeteries Department and tried to manage that. I think the MCB guidance is just brilliant. As I commented in the chat there, the issues, the way it's been highlighted, the safety, the insurance, the risk assessment, half the problems like insurance, some of the questions that were put up on the chat, risk assessment will solve it if we professionally carry out those risk assessment. Charitable object, remembering what our object is, and record keeping. I think one more further point, because I want to stick to my time, is one or two final points. I've just been watching this morning for offices. I'm a chartered accountant, I have office to open up, and I was looking at what sort of guidance the government has come up with. Some comments has just been made. Has government come up with guidance? Is MCB's guidance and the deliberations and the consultation of the Muslims being taken upwards towards the government and said, these are our views, this is what we need? And then what about the training videos? We talked about just, yes, holding some webinars like this, but we may need to roll out to all mosques and maybe come up with some videos that we could share around the community to make sure that we are able to open safely and look forward going to the full opening when the Ummah is able to gather in the name of La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, inshallah. And I am also concerned about the fact that the guidance of the mosque, we are also concerned, our mosques have asked about the question of what assistance is there for the charities. I think many mosques are suffering, and we should make sure our views are heard by the government, that there has to be some sort of assistance. We look forward to the support from MCB in training and continued support to make sure that we open up safely as we go forward. Thank you. Jazakallahu khair.
Thank you for that, Raza. Now I'm going to go to Cameron Shazad from the Sultan Bahu Trust in Birmingham.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. How are you all? Everyone can hear me okay? Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Thank you, everyone. I'm from Birmingham. I unofficially represent a group of mosques, and I'll come back to that a little while later on. Some of the key areas of concern, I think the major concern is everyone is still unclear about what opening mosques looks like here. We're all talking about risk assessments, and it's okay for the bigger mosques with professional people behind it. For the smaller mosques, it can be quite daunting. But the questions people are asking is, what does individual prayer look like? How does congregational prayer look like? The difference between small congregational prayer and larger congregational prayer. So I think because it's very early days, it's still very uncertain, and people are still working it out. Do we open our wudu areas? Do we not open our wudu areas? If we do open them, do we have the capacity to do cleaning every time somebody uses it? Other questions, how do we handle older people who want to come use the mosque? You know, we don't want to turn them away because the older generation look to the mosque. In fact, you find them using the mosque a lot more. So during this pandemic, how do we cater for their needs? Test and trace, the impact of test and trace on mosques. What does that look like? Do we have, like, part of test and trace is that you need to be able to tell the tracer who you've been in contact with? Do we at a masjid need to start keeping a register of everybody? What does the legal liability of that look like? So there's so many questions. Again, we were talking about large congregations, like Jummah is a very obvious one. How do we maintain sizes? Do we now, a new bid'ah I can see coming is an Eventbrite Jummah, where people register for Jummah, because it's difficult to turn people away. You can't. So there's these sort of questions that people are asking. Then there's obviously finances. I know there's been some chat on about reserves and so on. So again, that's okay for 3 months, and larger mosques can cope, but can the smaller ones? What support is available for them? Other concerns that people brought up was around madrasas and children. I mean, some mosques are keen to open madrasas and some are not. I think it's fair to say the majority are not. I think quite a lot of mosques have gone online teaching. But it's important to look at mosques madrasas in the same way as schools. Just like the head teacher has the power to open or close a school based on what they think works for them, the same responsibility lies with the trustees. Are they able to open it? Should they be opening it? But as far as I know, at the moment, madrasas are part of out of school settings, so it's not likely to open anytime soon or be given permission. But there are some people who are saying that, look, it's not fair for our children, it's not fair for us at home. There's only so much parents can do. There's only so much children can learn online. It's not good for children's mental and spiritual health. So those are some of the concerns. I think one of the questions I got asked is what are we doing in Birmingham and how are we doing it? It's quite interesting because in Birmingham, we don't have one body that represents all mosques, just because we're a large city, second city, and every mosque has their own umbrella organization like the MCB and others. So, but all mosques come together, well, not, quite a few mosques come together on a weekly basis on a Zoom call. And we are very lucky to have very direct access with some of the most senior directors within Birmingham City Council. So the Director of Public Health, who's been very instrumental in getting key messaging out to us that we all get. The Director for Communities, for Enforcement. We've got very close relationship with the police, and we're able to make very quick decisions that everybody gets behind. And that's allowed us all to be unified and all to get behind that messaging, and hence why, and this was, Birmingham has gone from being the second highest rate outside of London to much down the list. And if I remember correctly, and those from our Birmingham team can verify, that our Director of Public Health clearly said to us, he's expecting 9 to 10,000 deaths in Birmingham. That has remained at a very low number, around 3,000. And again, the comment was made to us that they credit that largely to the Muslims staying at home during Ramadan and adhering to the rules. So it's worked really, really well for us. And if anybody wants to observe our weekly meeting, you're more than welcome to do so. Please, there's plenty of MCB members, or you can get in touch with Adil Parker or Brother Adris or myself. And please do observe and see how we do it. But it's very unified, and I hope it continues. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you for that, Brother Kamran. We actually have time now for one more question. And I'd like to ask Brother Kamran if he could answer the question of, will any of the measures that have been in place during lockdown continue once the mosques reopen? And if so, which or how many of these will we be able to maintain and implement in the long term?
Which measures in particular? There's so many measures. See, also the measures are difficult because without getting into the politics, on one hand, we're on level, on one hand, we're on level 4, but on the other hand, we're seeing relaxation. So people are quite eager to go to the mosque. So why are we seeing the beaches and schools and others, people congregating, but we've got more stricter measures in mosques? And we completely get, you know, some of the Muslim community are still, have concerns, while other members of the community. But I'm not quite sure. There's so many measures, and I think we're at that point where measures and new guidelines will be coming in very fast and will be changing, and may even it seems like from what the government are doing, any lockdown measures now will be very targeted. From what I understand, if there's an outbreak on a certain road or within a certain area, the measures will only apply for that particular area. If it's within a mosque, they can close down a part of the test and traces. They can suspend the mosque for 72 hours while there's cleaning and deep cleaning. So it all depends. I think the guidance will become more and more clear over the next few weeks.
Thank you for that, Kamran. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time for any questions. However, if you do have any more questions, please email them to us at covid@mcb.org.uk. And now I'm going to hand over to our Deputy Secretary General, Hassan Judy, to conclude and summarize the session for us.
Jazakallah, Sister Basira, and Jazakallah to all the panelists for their contributions. Going backwards, Kamran from Birmingham, Brother Raza Hussein from Peterborough, Brother Ahmed and Najim and Yusuf from Nottingham, and at the beginning from Leicester, Sister Yasmin and Brother Riaz, and of course Sister Ismat, giving the female perspective. I just wanted to summarize, touch on a few of the points that have been raised, and also just highlight a few things that I think are important to reiterate before we close, inshallah. First, and I think it was briefly mentioned in one or two of the presentations, but I'd like to really emphasize it because we are aware that in some cities and towns, we are aware that some masjids are considering reopening and not prioritizing female access for the women's prayer space. And we think that this isn't right, and it's really important to emphasize that when the prayer spaces do reopen, that Muslim women are not discriminated against by only the male prayer spaces, for example, opening rather than the women. And I would urge all the regional associations, national associations, everyone who is speaking to and talking to centers who are now in these next few weeks going through their planning, to make every effort to think more creatively. If you're worried that you haven't got enough space, etc., of course those are of concern, but do not let that lead you to a decision that discriminates against Muslim women in your community who need to access the prayer space as well. Weddings and funerals is also an area which, of course, some of our community centres and mosques are used for those, and we understand again, it'll become clearer when there is guidance, but in Wales, who have got a bit of a head start compared to us at the moment in England, in the Midlands, some of the discussions that are going on there between the various interfaith bodies, including the Muslim communities, there is around limited wedding services, which are limited to a certain number, and because they're private events rather than a public gathering, then they're more easily being able to be controlled. And similarly with kind of funerals or janaza prayers. So we have fed back in some of our correspondence and some of our feedback to various government ministries here as well, and that it's important that there's much clearer guidelines around that. As we know, in some of the past few weeks, some of the guidance that has been put out so far has been ambiguous from government, unfortunately, but it's really important that there are clear lines, and we'll be pushing for that as much as possible. And I'm sure at the local authority level as well, all the regional associations and the councils of mosques and those who are in touch regularly with their city councils and with their local authorities to push for being as specific as possible. A case in point, and I think Yasmin, you briefly alluded to it when you in the in your presentation around what's happening in Leicestershire is around outdoor spaces. So of course we know now that as of Monday 2 days ago in England, it's allowed for up to 6 people from 2 different households to congregate, both in public spaces but also in private gardens as well. And of course what that means is that you know, if people from 2 different households wanted to have a Jum'ah Friday prayer in their back garden, that's possible as long as they follow the physical distancing measures, and as well as being maximum 2 households. And perhaps it'll be interesting to see what happens this Friday in terms of that, and of course in public spaces such as parks as well. You know, we may be seeing some of that as well, and it'll be genuinely interesting to see. But back into the context, I guess, of and some of the points that I think Raza Hussein and others mentioned around Jum'ah, and or the infamous Eventbrite Jum'ahs perhaps that we'll be seeing from July or whenever onwards. Perhaps open question and for discussion, perhaps some of our messaging to our communities needs to be that, yes, of course, before you were used to praying Jum'ah every week, perhaps at the masjid, but perhaps now as part of this, the new world, it's about maybe only a couple of your Jum'ahs a month, for example, praying at the masjid, and others finding alternative spaces where you can pray in smaller groups, whether it be in a back garden, whether it be in a more open space, for example, weather permitting, of course, if it's not pouring down with rain. So again, this is an opportunity, I think, for us to be thinking creatively about not only how we are reopening the institution. The institution itself is one aspect, but it's also about how we're educating our communities and their behavior, both with our institution directly, but also beyond and outside in their own sphere and in their own areas as well. One area that was mentioned in yesterday's session with the north of England, but that hasn't come up here in discussion so far, is Eid al-Adha. Which, of course, we've just finished Eid al-Fitr, but we're only about 8 weeks away from Eid al-Adha, and very soon, of course, the Hajj season. And we're certainly in London, I'm aware of many of the Eid in the Park organisers who are already starting to talk about what that looks like. Now, clearly, if the restrictions at the end of July are going to be similar to what they're at now, you know, a maximum 6 people congregating only, then, you know, that's the maximum limit that an Eid prayer can be. But of course, if things are changing, then there are opportunities. Many of us may have seen those infamous pictures of the, you know, in Germany, a big IKEA car park where there are massive Jum'ah there. And so certainly, you know, if the situation changes then and those things are possible, then of course, those are worthwhile things to explore. But of course, we need to not get ahead of ourselves and to assess how things are changing, how the regulations are changing first, and to plan appropriately with that, inshallah. I think one last point, I think it was mentioned by Imam Ahmed Pirbai from Nottingham, was around if there was in one city or town, some masjids would open and other. Now, naturally, of course, this goes back to my previous point about behavior. If everyone in that city or town was to suddenly now ram their capacity into only 30 of the 50 mosques in that city or town that was open, and of course you're going to have a huge issue. So again, going back to the education piece, can we think of some creative ways that we can be educating our communities to gradually, not all go back at the same time if the Jum'ahs are happening, that's the community side, but also from the masjid side, of course, as far as possible, it'd be ideal if, you know, all the masjids in one particular city or town would open at the same time. That would send a very strong, very united, very unified message to the community in that town. But also bear in mind that different masjids, depending on their capacity, may work at different paces. And if some masjids who, of course, are smaller, maybe under-resourced, have less volunteers, aren't able to get themselves ready in time for an agreed date, then perhaps there needs to be an understanding to help them along. And so that sharing of best practice, sharing of resources between those masjids in a city or town that maybe have more volunteers and staff who can share that and help the smaller ones who need the help. I think those are also valuable roles, a valuable role that the regional associations and councils of mosques can play in their respective cities and towns, inshallah. With that, and a final slide to show before we finish, inshallah, just a second. So as was mentioned, but just as a final summary, checklists, risk assessments, and display poster resources are being worked on, and with your support and your help and your feedback from today, and also outside of today, are being worked into that. And if there's an idea or suggestion that you have after today's session that you'd like to make, it's not too late. By all means, get in touch. Email us at covid@mcb.org.uk or via social media, and we can try our best to work it in. In terms of the fundraising that was mentioned, for those of you who aren't aware, there is a campaign that ran during the month of Ramadan called #SupportOurMosques, and this was providing free one-to-one support, tips and guidance, as well as training webinars about fundraising online. Of course, some of our masjids are used to doing that, and madrasas and community centres, but others are not. And we highly encourage those who are wanting to make that jump or to improve, even if you're already doing it and you want to improve and get more of your volunteers trained on how to do it. There is an art to it. It's not as simple as just sending a link and expecting everyone to click on it and donate to you. Then we highly encourage you to get involved in that campaign, supportourmosques.com. There are a few exciting things on the horizon for that campaign as well, including around Friday Jum'ahs, and encouraging our communities to get used to giving every Friday. And of course, we know many masjids are very effective at introducing the small standing orders, direct debits, £10 a month, £20 a month as well. It's another model. It works for some communities and doesn't work for others. But again, highly encourage you to get involved in that campaign and just get that free advice and support via the launchgood.com, who are the campaign partners for that. There are further feedback webinars that are taking place tomorrow for London and the South East and Southwest. So if you know anyone who would benefit from that, please do share with them the registration link. Separate to COVID and reopening, for your information, security of mosques from a hate crime, Islamophobia point of view. For those of you who don't know, there is a government consultation happening on this right now, ending at the end of this month, the 28th of June. For those who are interested to share their views on that and to make their voice known as part of that government consultation, you are welcome to join this roundtable session happening on the 11th of June, next Thursday, 5 to 6 p.m. The link is there to register, and these links will be sent to you if you've registered to today's session by email afterwards. The Visit My Mosque campaign, for those of you who have taken part in it before, happens every year in June. Of course, we can't do it in the normal way this year, but there will be a mini virtual campaign being run. Head over to the website visitmymosque.org to check out how to get involved with that, including some virtual mosque tours that are planned, inshallah, if you'd like to be part of that. And again, last thing to mention, any further questions after today's session, please get in touch at covid@mcb.org.uk. Once again, a big thank you to our panelists from Leicester, from Birmingham, from Peterborough, and from Nottingham. Thank you all for your time. We hope that the last 90 minutes has been useful, information-packed, given you some food for thought. And I think as Kamran mentioned in his session at the end, that we are ahead of ourselves here. It may seem like we're still a month away, actually, from mosques and madrasas and community centres being able to reopen in a phased approach. But unlike as we were going into this in March, where it was all suddenly happened within a couple of days and we all found ourselves suspended and locked out of our institutions that are beloved and close to our hearts, we have this month to plan and to prepare. And our ask as MCB and to all the regional associations is that now is the time really to engage, to reach out to those of us who are strong and organized in our communities, in our masjids and our community centers, to reach out to those who perhaps aren't, to make sure that no mosque, no madrasa, no community center is left behind from getting the guidance and the support that they need to be able to open, and of course open only if they are safe and ready and COVID secure to do so. So I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us increased strength and endurance in the coming weeks and months, to acknowledge and to be grateful for the patience that He has given us over the last 3 months, to endure the sacrifices and the challenges that we have all made, and to help, and of course the innovation and the adaptation that we have all seen our communities do unprecedented levels in the last 3 months, and may He allow us to continue to do that and to serve Him and to ultimately gain closeness and taqwa, inshallah, in the coming weeks and months ahead. Again, thank you very much for joining. Basira, have I missed anything that you'd like to mention before we finish? No, all good? In which case, thank you all again for joining. Do keep in touch, and we look forward to seeing you at a future webinar or session soon, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.